David Mitchell wasn't the kind of man who frequented bars, especially not on a Tuesday night when his 9-year-old son was waiting at home. But there he sat, nursing a beer he didn't really want, watching the amber liquid grow warm in his calloused hands. The woman beside him had been crying, not the obvious kind, but the silent tears that spoke of something deeper than a bad day at the office. Her expensive suit and confident posture told one story, while her trembling fingers wrapped around a whiskey glass told another entirely. When she finally looked up, their eyes met in the dim light of Murphy's Tavern, and David found himself asking a question he never intended to voice. "Mind if I ask what's got you looking like the world just ended?" David Mitchell had spent the last hour searching for Jimmy Santos, one of his electricians who'd vanished again. When Rosa called, worried about her husband's disappearing act and hidden bills, David knew this was different from Jimmy's usual drinking problems. That's how he found himself at Murphy's Tavern, scanning the dimly lit space for Jimmy's familiar shoulders. He was about to leave when Tony Rodriguez burst through the door, supporting a very drunk Jimmy. "Found him passed out behind Sullivan's auto shop," Tony called out. With Jimmy safe and heading home, David's mission was complete. Instead of leaving, he found himself ordering a beer, trying to process the familiar weight of being everyone's reliable backup plan. The woman next to him had been sitting motionless for 20 minutes, her whiskey barely touched. Her charcoal suit screamed money, but her hollow eyes spoke of emptiness David recognized from his own mirror after Sarah's death. When their eyes finally met, he saw someone else who understood carrying everything alone. "Mind if I ask what's got you looking like the world just ended?" The words came out in the gentle tone he used when Ethan woke from nightmares. Catherine Reynolds studied his honest brown eyes, noting the absence of predatory gleam or practiced charm. "You might be the first person in months to ask me that like you actually want to hear the answer," she said, extending a manicured hand. "David Mitchell, and I've got time to listen." Catherine found herself sharing more than intended. "I run a tech company, Reynolds Dynamics. We develop software for healthcare systems, help hospitals manage patient data more efficiently. Important work, meaningful work that saves lives." She paused, staring into her whiskey. "This morning I discovered that my CFO, Marcus Webb, my best friend since college, the man who was supposed to be my business partner for life, has been embezzling funds for over 2 years. David let out a low whistle. "That's got to hurt on more than just the financial level. The worst part is I should have seen it coming." Catherine continued, her voice carefully controlled but brittle. "Marcus has been acting strange for months, working late, being evasive about certain accounts, getting defensive when I asked simple questions. But I trusted him. I believed in him. And now the board is calling for my resignation, the FDA is launching an investigation, and our biggest clients are threatening to pull their contracts. 20 years of building something that mattered, gone because I was too blind to see what was happening right under my nose. Trust is a fragile thing," David said quietly, understanding more than she realized. "Once it's broken, it changes how you see everything else. Makes you question your own judgment." He thought about the friends who'd disappeared after Sarah died, uncomfortable with his grief or unsure how to relate to a single father. When someone you count on lets you down, it doesn't just hurt. It makes you wonder what other signs you might have missed. "You have children?" Catherine asked, noticing the gentle wisdom in his voice. "A son, Ethan. He's 9 years old." David's entire demeanor softened. Lost his mother 3 years ago in a car accident on Route 95. Drunk driver ran a red light while she was coming home from parent-teacher conferences. She was gone before the ambulance arrived. He paused, collecting himself. "It's just been the two of us since then, figuring things out as we go." Catherine felt something shift in her chest. "I'm so sorry. That must have been incredibly difficult." The hardest part isn't even the grief, as terrible as that is. David continued, his voice growing quieter. It's the constant fear that I'm not enough, that I can't be both mother and father to him, that I'm somehow failing him every day just by being all he has left. Sarah was the one with all the answers. She knew how to help with homework, handle playground drama, make Ethan feel safe when he had nightmares. I'm just the guy who taught him to throw a baseball and fix broken toys. But you're still here, Catherine pointed out gently. Still showing up for him every day, still trying your best. That has to count for something. I hope so, David said quietly. Most days I feel like I'm just making it up as I go along, hoping I don't screw up anything too important. But Ethan's a good kid, resilient, smart, kinder than I probably deserve. Sometimes I think he's the one raising me instead of the other way around. Catherine shared her own truth. I don't have children, never seemed to find the time or the right person, or maybe I was just too focused on building the company to think about building a family. Marcus used to joke that Reynolds Dynamics was my baby, the only child I'd ever need. Her laugh was bitter and self-deprecating. Looks like that baby might not survive to see its 21st birthday. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, two strangers who had somehow found themselves sharing truths usually reserved for close friends. The bar around them hummed with quiet conversation, but their corner felt separate from it all. "Can I ask you something?" Catherine said eventually, turning to face David more directly. "Why did you come over here tonight? I mean, really. Most men who approach women in bars have pretty obvious motivations, and you don't strike me as the type who makes a habit of this." David considered the question seriously. "Honestly? You reminded me of myself about 3 years ago. That look in your eyes, like you're carrying something too heavy but too proud to ask for help, too responsible to just walk away from your obligations even when they're crushing you." He met her gaze directly. "I know what that feels like, and maybe because my son is always asking me why people don't help each other more often. If someone looks sad, why don't we try to make them feel better?" That's what he asked me last week. Hard to answer that question honestly when you're walking past someone who clearly needs a friend. Catherine felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. "Your son sounds wise for his age." "He is. Sometimes I think he understands the world better than most adults. He has this way of cutting through all the complicated stuff and getting straight to what actually matters." David's smile became more genuine. "Yesterday he asked me why I always look sad when I think no one's watching. Kids see everything, you know? They notice things we think we're hiding." "What did you tell him?" "The truth, mostly. That sometimes adults have feelings they don't know how to fix. But that doesn't mean they're broken forever. That missing someone doesn't mean you can't be happy again. It just means you loved them enough for the missing to matter." David's voice grew quieter. "I'm still working on believing that last part myself." Catherine felt tears threatening. "He's lucky to have you. Show up and try," David said simply. "That's about all any of us can do." The words hit Catherine like revelation. When had she stopped simply showing up as herself? "I don't think I know how to do that anymore," she admitted. "Show up as myself? I've been playing the successful CEO for so long, I'm not sure who's underneath." "Maybe that's something you can figure out when this crisis settles," David suggested. "Besides, anyone who chooses Murphy's Tavern over some upscale wine bar has real person left in her somewhere." Despite everything, Catherine laughed genuinely. "This is my first bar since college. I'm not sure what the protocol is." "You're doing fine, though you might want to actually drink that whiskey." Catherine took a proper sip, feeling warmth spread through her chest. "I suspect the company has more to do with my improved mood than the alcohol." "Careful," David said with mock seriousness. "Compliments like that might give a guy ideas." What kind of ideas? David met her eyes directly. The kind where a guy starts thinking he'd like to see you smile like that again. Maybe under better circumstances. The moment stretched between them, filled with genuine connection. Then Catherine's phone buzzed. Emergency board meeting 8 a.m. Marcus's lawyer made contact. We need to talk tonight. I should go, Catherine said reluctantly. Thank you for tonight, for listening, for being kind to a stranger. It meant more than you know. Whatever happens tomorrow, remember that showing up is half the battle. You're stronger than you think. She paused at the door. Will you be here tomorrow night? David had no reason to return, every practical reason to go home to Ethan, but something in her voice made the decision easy. Yeah, I'll be here. The next evening, Catherine returned looking both polished and fragile. The board meeting had gone poorly. 2 weeks to resolve everything or face termination. Marcus had disappeared. The FBI investigation had begun officially. I keep wondering what I missed, Catherine said. Makes me question everything about reading people. How do I know you're not just some guy who preys on vulnerable women? David felt the genuine fear beneath her words. Marcus's betrayal had destroyed her ability to trust her own judgment. You don't know, he admitted. Trust is always a leap of faith. All I can tell you is I'm exactly who I appear to be, a single dad who works construction and happened to meet someone who needed a friend. Prove it, Catherine challenged. Show me your real life. David felt panic. His apartment was small, cluttered, nothing impressive. But her desperate need for authenticity made him nod. Okay, but it's not the lifestyle you're used to. It's just real life, messy and ordinary. Right now, authentic sounds more appealing than what I'm used to. His pickup truck was 7 years old with a dent and work tools rattling in the bed. Catherine climbed in without complaint, taking in the coffee-stained interior and Ethan's library books on the dashboard. His apartment building was modest brick with vinyl siding. This is it, David said, embarrassed. Fair warning, Ethan's probably still awake and has no filter. The apartment was lived in but clean. Ethan's backpack by the door, homework on the coffee table, family photos of Sarah everywhere. It smelled like their dinner of spaghetti and jarred sauce. Dad? Ethan's voice called. Did you forget something? I brought a friend to meet you. Is that okay? Ethan appeared in Superman pajamas, studying Catherine with frank curiosity before deciding she passed some test. He extended his hand formally. I'm Ethan Mitchell. Nice to meet you. Catherine Reynolds. Very nice to meet you, too. Are you Dad's girlfriend? Ethan asked with devastating directness. Ethan? David warned, flushing. It's okay. No, I'm just a friend. Your dad was kind when I was having a difficult day. Want to see my rocket ship? I built it myself for the science fair. Catherine found herself being led to Ethan's room, listening to excited explanations about space exploration. She asked intelligent questions, genuinely interested in his rocket engine theories. David watched amazed as she gave Ethan the same focused attention she probably gave board meetings. She's really nice, Dad. Ethan whispered loudly. And pretty too. You should keep her. After Ethan was tucked in, David and Catherine sat on his small balcony overlooking the parking lot. The contrast between their worlds was stark, but Catherine felt more at peace than she had in months. This is your real life, Catherine said quietly. This is it. Nothing fancy, but it's ours. Ethan and I built something good here. Tell me about Sarah, Catherine said gently. David was quiet long enough Catherine thought he might not answer. She was a third-grade teacher, had this gift for making every kid feel special. We were waiting for the right time for more children, always thinking we had more time than we did. How did it happen? Drunk driver ran a red light while she was coming home from parent-teacher conferences. Gone before the ambulance arrived. His voice was factual, but Catherine heard years of pain beneath. The hardest part wasn't grief, it was fear. Suddenly I was responsible for this little person and had no idea if I was strong enough. But you figured it out. We figured it out together. Sometimes the worst thing that happens reveals the best thing about who you are. Catherine looked at this man who'd lost everything and built a new life from ashes. I don't think I'm that strong. You're here, aren't you? Still fighting for your company and employees? That sounds strong to me. David, Catherine said quietly, I think I'm falling for you. The admission hung between them. David felt his heart skip, but doubt followed. Catherine was extraordinary. She deserved someone who could match her accomplishments. Catherine, I need you to understand something. We come from different worlds. I can't give you the lifestyle you're used to. I don't care about any of that. You say that now, but what happens when you remember what it's like to have financial security? When you realize dating a single father means never being first priority? Before Catherine could respond, David's phone buzzed. Mrs. Patterson. Ethan getting sick. Feels warm and coughing. You should check. They found Ethan with 102 fever, struggling with his asthma. The pediatrician wanted him in emergency immediately. Catherine offered to drive, and David swallowed his pride. At the hospital, Catherine naturally comforted Ethan with questions about his rocket project. The diagnosis was respiratory infection requiring antibiotics, but Catherine stayed through everything. Thank you, David said at 2:30 a.m. in his hallway. You didn't have to stay. Where else would I be? This is what people do for each other. Standing exhausted in his modest hallway, David finally understood they'd found not just love, but partnership. Catherine, I think I'm falling for you too. The following weeks fell into natural patterns. Catherine stopped by after work, helping with homework and learning domestic routines. But contrasts between their worlds became more apparent daily. Her phone rang constantly with million-dollar crises, while David worried about affording Ethan's shoes and washing machine repairs. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening when Catherine arrived looking more stressed than usual. She'd spent the day in emergency meetings with potential investors, trying to secure funding while the FBI investigation continued. How was your day? She asked, collapsing onto his couch. Fine, David replied, but something in his tone made Catherine look up sharply. What happened? She asked, recognizing the careful neutrality that suggested trouble. David hesitated, clearly reluctant to add his problems to her burden. Ethan's teacher called this afternoon, Mrs. Henderson. She wants to recommend him for the district's gifted and talented program. He tested in the 99th percentile for math and science. David, that's amazing, Catherine said, her exhaustion forgotten. You must be so proud. Ethan's always been brilliant, but to have it officially recognized, I am proud, David said quietly, his voice heavy with conflicted emotions. But the program requires transfer to a private academy that specializes in accelerated learning. The tuition is $15,000 a year, Catherine. Even with the financial aid they're offering, it's still more than I can afford. So I had to tell Mrs. Henderson no. I had to tell my 9-year-old son that he can't participate in something that could really help his future, because his father doesn't make enough money to give him the opportunities he deserves. Catherine felt her heart clench. David, that's terrible. But surely there are other options. Scholarships, payment plans. I looked into everything, David said, running his hands through his hair in frustration. Applied for every scholarship, every grant, every program I could find. But there are a lot of smart kids whose parents can't afford private school tuition. The competition is fierce, and we didn't make the cut. I could help, Catherine offered immediately. $15,000 really isn't that much, David. I could easily cover Ethan's tuition without it affecting my budget at all. It would be my pleasure to invest in such a bright kid's future. No. David's response was so sharp, Catherine felt like she'd been slapped. Absolutely not. But why? Catherine asked, genuinely confused. If I can afford it and Ethan needs it, what's the problem? It's not charity, it's an investment in a brilliant child's education. Because then what happens? David stood up abruptly, beginning to pace the small living room like a caged animal. You pay for his school this year. Then what about next year when the tuition goes up? What about high school, college, graduate school if he wants it? What about everything else he needs that I can't provide? Better clothes, tutoring, college prep courses, all the advantages that kids from wealthy families get? Catherine began to understand this wasn't really about money. We could work something out, a formal arrangement. Do you hear yourself? David interrupted, his voice rising with frustration and pain. You're talking about setting up arrangements for my son because his father isn't successful enough to take care of him properly. Do I just accept that my child's future depends on your charity? Do I teach him that his dad isn't capable of providing for him? It's not charity, Catherine protested, but she could hear how the words sounded from his perspective. It's about everything, David said, his voice heavy with self-doubt. It's about the fact that you live in a world where $15,000 is pocket change, something you wouldn't think twice about spending. I live in a world where that's more than I have in savings after 3 years of careful budgeting and working overtime whenever I can get it. It's about the fact that you can solve problems with a phone call that take me months to figure out. No matter how much we care about each other, I can't give you the life you deserve, and you can't fix the limitations of mine without making me feel like a complete failure as a father and a man. The words hung in the air between them, honest and painful, and absolutely true. Catherine felt something breaking in her chest, recognizing how naive she'd been about the practical realities that could tear apart even the strongest emotional connection. So what are you saying? She asked quietly, though she was beginning to understand exactly what he was saying. David stopped pacing and turned to face her, his eyes full of pain and love and a resignation that terrified her. I'm saying that maybe we need to be realistic about what this is and what it can be. Maybe we're just two lonely people who found comfort in each other for a while, but that doesn't mean we can build a sustainable life together. That's not what this is. Catherine protested, standing to face him directly. David, what we have is real. The connection, the way we understand each other, the way I feel when I'm with you and Ethan. None of that has anything to do with money or social status. Doesn't it? David asked sadly. Catherine, you're fighting to save a company worth millions of dollars. You operate in a world of influence and power that shapes entire industries. And I'm worried about affording new shoes for my kid and whether the washing machine will last another 6 months. How long before you realize that I can't be the partner you need for the life you're actually living? Catherine could see the fear in his eyes, not just fear of financial inadequacy, but the bone-deep terror of being not enough for the people he loved most. How long before you remember what it feels like to have financial security and professional respect and start resenting the compromises you'd have to make to be with someone like me? David asked, his voice breaking slightly. David, you're not giving me a choice in this. Catherine said, tears starting to fall. You're deciding for both of us that this won't work, based on fears that might never materialize. I'm protecting all of us, David replied, his voice thick with emotion. Including Ethan. He's already getting attached to you, Catherine. He talks about you constantly, asks when you're coming over, lights up whenever your name is mentioned. What happens when you realize that being with me means giving up the life you're used to? What happens when you decide that love isn't enough to compensate for everything you'd be sacrificing? Ethan's already lost one mother. I can't let him get more attached to someone who might decide to leave when things get difficult. I won't put him through that kind of loss again. I would never hurt Ethan, I would never leave because of money. You say that now, but people change their minds. I can't risk letting Ethan believe you're permanent if there's any chance you might decide otherwise. Catherine gathered her things, moving slowly as if in a dream, understanding that this conversation had moved beyond rational argument into the realm of deep-seated fears and protective instincts. David wasn't just rejecting her help with Ethan's schooling, he was rejecting her, choosing the safety of isolation over the risk of vulnerability and potential loss. "So this is it?" she asked, her voice shaking with emotion. "You're ending this before we even have a real chance to see if it could work? You're making a unilateral decision based on problems that might never happen?" "I'm saving us all from a lot of pain down the road," David said, but his voice lacked conviction, and Catherine could see the struggle in his eyes. "For what it's worth, David," Catherine said as she gathered her purse and jacket with trembling hands, "I think you're making a terrible mistake. Not about the practical challenges, those are real, and they would require work and compromise from both of us, but about what I want and what I'm willing to sacrifice for it." She paused at the door, looking back at this man she'd come to love so deeply in such a short time. "And I think you're underestimating both yourself and Ethan. You've built something beautiful here, something that has nothing to do with money and everything to do with love and character and strength. The fact that you can't see that breaks my heart more than losing you does." David wanted to call her back, to take back everything he'd said, to find some way to bridge the impossible gap between their worlds. But the fear was stronger than the desire, the terror of inadequacy more powerful than love. He watched her leave and told himself he was doing the right thing, protecting the people he loved from inevitable disappointment and loss, even as every instinct screamed that he was making the biggest mistake of his life. The silence that followed Catherine's departure felt different from the comfortable quiet David was used to in his apartment. It was heavy with regret and lost possibilities, filled with the ghost of her laughter and the memory of how right it had felt when she was there. When Ethan emerged from his room an hour later, he immediately noticed the change in atmosphere. Children were remarkably sensitive to emotional undercurrents, and Ethan had learned to read his father's moods with the accuracy of someone whose security depended on understanding the adults around him. "Where's Catherine?" he asked, looking around the apartment as if she might be hiding somewhere. "She had to go home," David replied, not quite lying, but not telling the whole truth either. "She's very busy with her work right now." "Is she coming back tomorrow?" Ethan's question was casual, but David could hear the underlying anxiety. His son had learned to be wary of people disappearing from their lives without warning. "I don't think so, buddy," David said carefully, his heart breaking at the disappointment that flickered across Ethan's face. "Catherine's work is really demanding right now, and we probably won't be seeing her for a while." Ethan processed this information with the careful consideration of a child who'd already learned that adults sometimes left without adequate explanation. "Did we do something wrong?" he asked quietly, the question that haunted every child who'd experienced loss. "No," David said firmly, kneeling down to Ethan's eye level and placing his hands on his son's shoulders. "We didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes adults make decisions that don't have anything to do with whether people are good or bad. Sometimes things just change, even when we don't want them to. But I liked her," Ethan said, his lower lip trembling slightly with the effort of holding back tears. "She was nice to us. She listened when I talked about rockets, and she helped me with my math homework, and she made you smile more than you have since Mom died." The simple observation hit David like a physical blow. His 9-year-old son had noticed something David himself had been trying to ignore. Catherine had made him happy in a way he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. "I liked her too," David admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "Sometimes that's not enough, though. Sometimes caring about someone means making hard choices about what's best for everyone involved. Ethan considered this with the seriousness of someone far older than 9. Mom used to say that love means wanting what's best for someone, even if it's not what's best for you, he said quietly. The simple wisdom of his son's observation hit David like a revelation. Sarah had always been better at seeing the bigger picture. If she were here now, what would she say about his decision to push Catherine away? 3 weeks passed without contact. David found himself checking his phone constantly, driving past Catherine's office, avoiding Murphy's Tavern. Ethan stopped mentioning Catherine, but watched his father with careful attention. Catherine threw herself into saving her company with desperate determination. The FBI investigation was concluding favorably. New investors were interested, but success felt hollow without anyone to share it with. The crisis came during a late-night strategy session when Catherine's phone buzzed with news alert. Local construction worker injured in workplace accident, child hospitalized. Something in her gut made her call the hospital. When she whispered, "Ethan Mitchell," the operator confirmed he was indeed a patient. Catherine abandoned her legal team, racing to the hospital. She found Ethan first, arm in a cast and bandage on his forehead, but his face lit up seeing her. "Catherine, you came back." "Of course I came back. Are you okay?" Ethan explained the scaffolding accident. Dad had pushed him out of the way but got hurt worse. "I was scared they might send me away if Dad can't take care of me." "You're not going anywhere. I'm staying with you, and we're making sure your dad gets better." She found David unconscious, head wrapped in bandages. The doctor explained severe concussion with brain swelling, but expected full recovery within days. Catherine settled into a 3-day vigil, cancelling everything. She coordinated with David's crew, contacted Ethan's school, and most importantly, comforted a frightened child. When David finally woke on day 3, his first concern was Ethan. Seeing Catherine by the door, awareness returned, gratitude, embarrassment, hope. "You've been here?" "Where else would I be?" David closed his eyes, overwhelmed. Despite his fears, despite pushing her away, Catherine had shown up when they needed her most. "I was wrong about everything. I was so scared of not being enough that I forgot you might choose us anyway. I forgot love isn't about deserving someone. It's about choosing them daily." "We don't have to talk about this now." "Yes, I do. Catherine, I love you. You make Ethan laugh, make our apartment feel like home, make me believe I don't have to carry everything alone. I was an idiot to think protecting us from potential heartbreak was more important than giving us a chance at happiness. I love you too, both of you. I'm here because this is where I belong." "Does this mean Catherine can come home with us?" Ethan asked hopefully. David looked at Catherine with clear eyes full of love and courage. "Catherine, would you like to come home with us? Not as a visitor, but as part of our family?" Catherine thought about her penthouse and carefully ordered life, then looked at David and Ethan and realized home had always been people who made her feel like she belonged. "Yes," she said simply. "I'd like that very much." 6 months later, Catherine stood in their new house's kitchen, comfortable 3-bedroom in good school district, where Ethan could bike to the park and David could have a workshop. She was making breakfast, a simple task bringing more satisfaction than any corporate achievement. Ethan bounded in carrying his completed science fair rocket, calling her Mom with casual ease that meant more than any professional recognition. The gifted program had accepted him with scholarship Catherine quietly arranged through her foundation. David emerged, moving steadily as he recovered. The accident had helped him understand protecting those he loved didn't mean refusing help offered with genuine care. "Ready for the science fair?" he asked Ethan. "Ready, and Catherine promised pictures so we can remember forever." David caught Catherine's eye, sharing perfect understanding. They'd built something beautiful, not just a relationship, but a family based on mutual respect and love that showed up consistently. Forever sounds about right, David said quietly, pulling them both into a gentle hug. Forever sounds perfect. As they headed out together, Catherine reflected on how wrong she'd been about success. She'd saved her company, but those achievements paled next to belonging somewhere, being chosen not for what she could provide, but for who she was. David had been right. Love was about showing up. But Catherine had been showing up all along, waiting for him to realize some risks were worth taking, some people worth trusting with your whole heart. Their love story hadn't ended in Murphy's Tavern. It had begun there, with two lonely people choosing connection over isolation, hope over fear, and the beautiful uncertainty of building a life together over the safety of facing the future alone. That's exactly why you need to make this choice now before things get any worse, Jake said. The people Margaret works with don't leave loose ends, Tom. If this operation gets exposed and you're still on the wrong side of it, they're not going to trust you to keep quiet about what you've seen. Your association with them puts both you and Alex in danger. As if summoned by their conversation, Tom's phone buzzed with a text message from Margaret. Excellent work tonight. Ready for Phase 2 tomorrow. Much larger compensation package. Tom showed the message to Jake, who nodded grimly. Phase 2 probably means they're ramping up for something big, maybe their final major theft before shutting down this location. That's your window, Tom. After tomorrow night, it might be too late to get out cleanly. Tom thought about Alex waking up that morning, full of excitement about his volcano project and trust in his father's ability to make everything right. He thought about Dr. Chen's concern about the boy's worsening condition and the surgery that could save his life. But most of all, he thought about what kind of man he wanted to be when his son looked back on this period of their lives. If I do this, if I help the FBI, what happens to Alex's surgery? I still don't have the money, and now I won't be getting it from Margaret. Jake's expression softened completely for the first time during their conversation. Tom, Memorial General has a charity care program that covers exactly these kinds of situations. The paperwork is complicated, and the approval process takes time, but Dr. Chen has been trying to get your son qualified for months. She's been waiting for you to ask for help through official channels. The revelation hit Tom like a second physical blow. While he'd been risking his freedom and his family's safety in Margaret's illegal scheme, the legitimate help he needed had been available all along. His pride and desperation had blinded him to possibilities that existed within the system he'd been trying to circumvent. Tom picked up Agent Mitchell's business card and slipped it into his wallet. What do I need to do? The next evening, Tom returned to Memorial General Hospital wearing a wire so small and sophisticated that he forgot it was there within minutes of putting it on. Agent Mitchell had spent the afternoon coaching him on how to guide conversations toward useful information without appearing suspicious. But as he walked through the familiar corridors, Tom felt as though he was seeing the building through completely different eyes. Margaret was waiting for him in the basement storage area, but she wasn't alone. 3 men in dark suits stood near a collection of containers that dwarfed anything Tom had seen before. The operation had clearly escalated beyond anything that could be explained as routine pharmaceutical redistribution. This looked like the complete theft of an entire medical supply shipment. Tom, perfect timing, Margaret said, her professional smile unchanged despite the obviously criminal nature of what surrounded them. I'd like you to meet some of my business associates. They're very impressed with your reliability and discretion. One of the men stepped forward, and Tom recognized him as the cold-eyed individual from the warehouse the previous night. Margaret tells us you're ready to expand your role in our organization. We have positions available for someone with your skills and access to medical facilities. Tom forced himself to appear interested while the wire recorded every word. What kind of positions? Regional Distribution Coordinator, the man replied. You'd help us establish similar operations at hospitals throughout the state. The compensation would be substantial, enough to solve any financial problems you might have permanently." As the man outlined their expansion plans, Tom realized the true scope of what he'd stumbled into. This wasn't just theft from a single hospital, it was a coordinated criminal enterprise that had infiltrated medical facilities across multiple states. The medications they were stealing weren't just being sold illegally, they were being replaced with counterfeit drugs that could kill unsuspecting patients. The conversation was interrupted by the sudden wailing of the hospital's emergency alarm system, followed by an announcement that made Tom's blood freeze. "Code Silver, Emergency Department. Code Silver, Emergency Department. All personnel to lockdown positions." Code Silver meant an armed intruder in the hospital. But as Tom looked at the faces of Margaret and her associates, he realized with growing horror that the emergency wasn't a random act of violence. The men around him were reaching inside their jackets, and Margaret's calm expression suggested she'd been expecting this development. "Gentlemen," Margaret said quietly, "it appears our timeline has been accelerated. Tom, I'm afraid you're about to see exactly how serious we are about protecting our interests." The sound of gunshots echoed through the hospital corridors above them, and Tom understood that whatever was happening upstairs was connected to the criminal organization he'd been helping to document. But as the basement filled with armed men and the reality of immediate danger replaced his fears about future consequences, Tom realized that all his careful planning with the FBI might not be enough to get him out of Memorial General Hospital alive. The wire hidden beneath his shirt continued recording as Tom faced the possibility that his attempt to save his son might have cost them both everything, and that the second chance Jake Morrison had offered him was about to be cut tragically short by the very people he'd been trying to help the authorities catch. Lily's true identity as Victoria Sterling was officially recognized by the courts after extensive investigation, her adoption by William Sterling validated through DNA testing and document analysis. Her right to control Meridian Industries was confirmed beyond any legal challenge that prosecutors or defense attorneys could mount. The company's stock price, which had plummeted during the initial media coverage of the scandal, rebounded stronger than ever as investors realized they were dealing with a CEO who'd risked everything to protect her employees rather than save herself. But the real transformation was more personal and harder to quantify than stock prices or legal victories, changes that couldn't be measured in dollars or documented in court transcripts. Thomas found himself appointed as Chief Security Officer for all of Meridian Industries, his engineering background and intimate knowledge of the company's systems making him invaluable in the post-Marcus era. More importantly, he discovered that protecting something larger than himself gave his life a meaning that grief had stolen and solitude had never been able to restore. Jake adapted to their new circumstances with the resilience that had always amazed Thomas, moving from the cramped trailer to a comfortable house near Meridian's headquarters and thriving in a school district that could nurture his obvious aptitude for building things and solving problems. The boy seemed to understand, with the intuition that children often possess, that his father had found not just a job, but a purpose, something worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth the risk of caring again. Lily threw herself into rebuilding Meridian with the passion of someone who'd almost lost everything and refused to take anything for granted again. She established safety protocols that became industry standards, created worker protection programs that other corporations studied and copied, and transformed Meridian from a simple technology company into a model for ethical business practices. Under her leadership, the company's value grew from $18 billion to $22 billion, but more importantly, it became a place where 15,000 families could build secure futures. The pocket watch that had belonged to Thomas's grandfather began keeping time again, though neither Thomas nor Lily could explain exactly when it had started working. Thomas suspected it had something to do with having people worth measuring time for again, with building a life that looked forward instead of backward. He wore it every day, not as a monument to grief, but as a reminder that every second was an opportunity to build something better than what had existed before. 1 year after the night that had nearly destroyed everything they cared about, Thomas stood in his office on the 47th floor of Meridian Industries. His title was Chief Security Officer, but his real job was more complex than any organizational chart could capture. He was the guardian of something fragile and valuable. Jake burst through his office door with the enthusiasm that 9-year-olds brought to everything, his backpack trailing school papers and his face bright with the excitement of sharing his day. "Daddy, guess what we learned about in science class?" The boy launched into an elaborate explanation of gear ratios and mechanical advantage, his hands moving in animated gestures that reminded Thomas of Sarah's grace. Lily appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with the patient smile of someone who'd learned to find joy in simple moments after surviving experiences that could have destroyed her capacity for happiness. She'd changed since the crisis. Still brilliant, still driven, but softer somehow, as if confronting her deepest fears had freed her to be human instead of perfect. "How was the board meeting?" Thomas asked, though he could read the answer in her relaxed posture and genuine smile. "They approved the expansion of the Emily Chen Safety Institute," Lily replied, settling into the chair across from Thomas's desk. "Full funding for 5 new research facilities and partnerships with universities in 12 states. Emily would have loved knowing that her death led to something that could save thousands of lives." There was still sadness in her voice when she spoke of her friend, but it was the gentle sadness of someone who'd learned to honor the dead by living fully. Jake had finished his explanation of gear ratios and moved on to examining the pocket watch that sat on Thomas's desk, its steady ticking a counterpoint to the boy's excited chatter. "Why does it have 2 different speeds?" Jake asked, having noticed with the sharp observation skills that children possessed that the second hand moved normally, while a smaller sub-dial seemed to count something else entirely. Thomas exchanged a glance with Lily, both of them remembering the modifications she'd made during those desperate hours when every second had counted. "Sometimes," Thomas explained carefully, choosing words that would make sense to a 9-year-old while honoring the complexity of what the watch had come to represent. "You need to measure different kinds of time. Regular time for everyday things like school and work and meals, and special time for moments that matter more than others." Jake considered this with the seriousness that children brought to concepts they sensed were important but didn't fully understand. "Like when Mummy was sick?" he asked quietly, and Thomas felt his throat tighten with familiar emotion. "Yes," Thomas said softly, pulling Jake onto his lap with the gentle strength that had become second nature. "Like when Mummy was sick, and every minute we had together was precious because we knew our time was limited. But also like now, when we're building something good together, and every day feels like a gift we didn't expect to receive." Jake nestled against his father's chest, his small hand tracing the watch's intricate face, as if he could read the story of their family in its mechanical movements. Lily watched them with an expression that Thomas was learning to recognize. A mixture of love and wonder and gratitude that seemed to surprise her every time she felt it. She'd told him once that she'd never expected to have a family, had assumed that her complicated past and dangerous secrets made such normal happiness impossible. But here they were, 3 people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their separate tragedies and somehow built something beautiful from the scattered pieces. "I have something to show you both," Lily said, pulling out a tablet that displayed architectural plans for a residential complex. "The Sterling Family Housing Initiative. Affordable homes for Meridian employees, built with the latest safety technology and designed to grow with families over time. The first units will be ready next spring." Thomas studied the plans with his engineer's eye, noting the innovative design elements and sustainable building practices that would make the homes both beautiful and practical. The project represented everything they'd been working toward. Not just corporate success, but human flourishing. Not just profit, but purpose. "It's perfect," he said, meaning more than just the architectural details. This was how healing looked when it was applied on a community scale. The transformation of tragedy into hope, the conversion of loss into legacy. Emily Chen's death had led to safety innovations that would protect countless workers across multiple industries, her sacrifice becoming the foundation for regulations and technologies that would prevent other families from experiencing similar losses. Sarah's love lived on in the way Thomas approached every challenge with patience and determination, her gentle strength providing the emotional foundation that allowed him to protect and nurture others. Even Marcus Webb's crimes, in their exposure and punishment, had created opportunities for justice and reform that wouldn't have existed otherwise. The pocket watch ticked steadily on Thomas's desk, its sound barely audible above the hum of air conditioning and the distant sounds of a building full of people working towards something larger than themselves. Thomas had learned to hear music in that steady rhythm, not the desperate counting down of time running out, but the hopeful marking of moments that added up to a life worth living. Each tick was a second they'd survived, each tock a promise that the next second was coming whether they were ready or not. Or Jake had fallen asleep against Thomas's chest, his breathing deep and even, his small body completely relaxed in the security of his father's arms. Thomas shifted carefully to avoid waking him, marveling at the weight of trust that children placed in the adults who loved them, the complete faith that tomorrow would come and bring new adventures and opportunities for growth. This was what they'd been fighting for. Not just corporate profits or personal vindication, but the simple right of children to sleep peacefully in their father's arms while mothers looked on with love in their eyes. "He's getting so big," Lily whispered, reaching over to smooth Jake's hair with the tenderness of someone who'd learned that family wasn't just about blood connections, but about choosing to love and protect each other every single day. Thomas nodded, remembering how small Jake had seemed in those first terrible months after Sarah's death, how the boy had seemed to shrink along with their world until it felt like they might both disappear entirely. But here they were, not just surviving but thriving, not just enduring but building something beautiful and lasting. The $18 billion empire was safe, but more importantly, the people it served were flourishing, communities were strengthening, and futures were being built on foundations solid enough to support dreams that previous generations could never have imagined possible. Sometimes the best victory wasn't just saving what you had, but transforming it into something better than anyone had dared to imagine. And sometimes the most unlikely heroes were those who'd already learned that losing everything could be the beginning of finding something worth fighting for. Success, Grace had learned, wasn't measured in stock prices or market share, but in moments of connection, in the quiet satisfaction of building something meaningful, in the certain knowledge that love multiplied rather than divided when shared freely and without condition. The innocent observation hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither adult was quite ready to address directly. But as they stood together in that tournament hall, surrounded by chessboards and the echoes of a hard-fought victory, Madison Clark and David Miller both realized that some games change everyone who plays them, and that the most important victories are often the ones that nobody keeps score of. 6 months after David Miller's tournament victory, Madison Clark found herself in an unfamiliar position, sitting in the bleachers of Riverside Elementary School's multipurpose room, watching Emma perform in the 3rd grade spring concert while trying to process how completely her life had changed since that first chess game at the community center. David sat beside her, wearing the same flannel shirt he had worn to their first meeting, though now it was by choice rather than necessity. His tournament winnings and subsequent sponsorship deals had provided financial stability, but he had chosen to maintain the simple lifestyle that had sustained him and Emma through their most difficult years. Success, he had learned, was about having enough rather than having everything. Emma's clear soprano voice carried across the room as she sang her solo in Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and Madison felt her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Watching this confident, joyful child perform with such natural grace, it was hard to imagine the scared little girl who had spent weeks in the hospital, or the father who had sat vigil beside her bed while his world crumbled around him. "She's incredible," Madison whispered, not trusting her voice to remain steady at normal volume. David nodded, his eyes never leaving Emma as she moved through the choreography with the kind of unself-conscious joy that only children possess. "Sarah always said Emma would be a performer," he said quietly. "She used to sing lullabies that could make Emma stop crying instantly, even when she was a baby." It was the first time in months that David had mentioned his late wife without the shadow of pain that usually accompanied such references, and Madison realized that somewhere in their journey together, he had found a way to honor Sarah's memory without being imprisoned by it. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it had transformed from a weight that held him down into something more like a compass that pointed him toward what mattered most. The concert concluded with all the children singing together, their voices blending in the kind of imperfect harmony that parents find more beautiful than any professional performance. As the audience applauded and families began gathering their children, Madison became aware of the other parents glancing in their direction with curious expressions. She and David had become something of a local celebrity couple, though neither of them was entirely comfortable with the attention. The chess world had embraced David's comeback story with enthusiasm, and Madison's role as his sponsor and partner had generated its own media interest. Several magazines had run features about their relationship, though they had been careful to keep the focus on David's professional achievements rather than their personal lives. "Daddy! Madison!" Emma ran toward them with the breathless excitement of a performer who had just conquered the world. Her costume, a sparkly blue dress that she had helped choose, caught the gymnasium lights as she moved, making her look like a small star who had temporarily descended to earth. David scooped her up in a hug that lifted her feet off the ground. "You were amazing, sweetheart. That solo was perfect." Emma beamed at the praise, then turned to Madison with an expression that had become familiar over the past months, the look of a child who had claimed an additional adult as family. "Did you hear me sing the rainbow song? I thought about Mommy when I sang it, because Daddy says she's somewhere over the rainbow now." Madison felt tears threaten at the casual way Emma had learned to integrate her mother's memory into her daily life, turning loss into something that enhanced rather than diminished her joy. "I heard every note," Madison said. "Your Mommy would be so proud of you." As they prepared to leave the school, several other parents approached with congratulations about Emma's performance and questions about David's next tournament schedule. Madison watched him handle the attention with the kind of gracious professionalism he had developed since returning to competitive play, but she could see the slight tension in his posture that suggested he was still adjusting to being a public figure again. The drive home took them through the familiar streets of their neighborhood, past the community center where they had first met, and the elementary school where David still occasionally worked as a substitute teacher. Emma chatted from the back seat about her classmates' performances and her plans for summer vacation, her voice providing a cheerful soundtrack to the comfortable silence between the adults. "I've been thinking," David said as they pulled into Madison's driveway, a ritual that had developed over months of shared dinners and homework supervision and chess lessons. About what comes next. Madison felt her stomach flutter with anticipation mixed with anxiety. They had been carefully avoiding conversations about the future, focusing instead on the day-to-day reality of building something neither of them had expected to find. "What kind of thinking?" David turned off the engine and looked at her with the same focused intensity he brought to critical chess positions. I've been offered a spot in the US Championship qualifying cycle. It would mean more travel, higher stakes, the kind of pressure I walked away from 5 years ago. Emma had gone quiet in the back seat, and Madison realized that she was listening to the conversation with the sharp attention of a child who understood that adult decisions could change everything about her world. "And?" Madison prompted, though she thought she could guess the direction of his thoughts. "And I keep thinking about what you said at the hospital, about helping Emma know that her father is a hero. I want her to see that choosing love doesn't mean giving up on excellence, that you can honor the people you've lost by becoming the best version of yourself." Madison nodded, understanding both the ambition and the fear in his voice. "But?" David smiled, the expression carrying all the wisdom he had gained from loss and recovery and learning to hope again. "But I also want her to know that the most important victories happen when the people you love are there to share them with you." Emma unbuckled her seatbelt and leaned forward between their seats. "Daddy, are you asking Madison to marry you? Because if you are, you're supposed to ask me first if it's okay, and then you have to give her a ring." The directness of the question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that made Madison's heart race, and David's face flush with embarrassment. They had been moving toward this conversation for months, but Emma's innocent intervention had accelerated the timeline considerably. "Actually," David said, reaching into his jacket pocket with the kind of careful movement that suggested he had been planning this moment. "I was getting to that part." He pulled out a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a simple diamond ring that caught the late afternoon light streaming through the car windows. "Madison Clark," he said, his voice carrying the same quiet confidence he had shown during their first chess game. "You taught me that it's possible to build something new from the pieces of what you've lost. Will you marry me and help me teach Emma that love is the only game worth winning?" Madison stared at the ring, processing the magnitude of what David was offering. Not just marriage, but partnership in raising Emma, integration into a family that had learned to find joy after devastating loss, the chance to build a life based on love rather than achievement. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with how quickly and certainly the word came. "Yes, of course. Yes." As David slipped the ring onto her finger and Emma cheered from the back seat, Madison realized that she had finally found the victory that mattered most, not defeating opponents or accumulating wealth or proving her superiority, but joining a family that had taught her the difference between winning and being happy. Emma's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Does this mean I get to call you Mom now? Because I've been practicing, and I think you'd like it." Madison looked at this extraordinary child who had somehow claimed her heart as completely as her father had, and realized that some games truly do change everyone who plays them, and that the best victories are the ones where everybody wins. "I would love that more than anything in the world," Madison said, pulling Emma into a hug that felt like coming home. As they sat together in the car, three people who had found each other across circumstances that should have kept them apart, David Miller reflected on the strange mathematics of love, how losing everything had somehow led him to gain more than he had ever dared to hope for. But Emma, with the wisdom that children sometimes possess about the most important things, had the final word. "I knew you were going to be my mum from the very first day we met you. Daddy just took a long time to figure it out because grown-ups are sometimes slow about the obvious stuff." And as they laughed together in the fading afternoon light, Madison Clark and David Miller both understood that their greatest victory had nothing to do with chess, and everything to do with learning that the best moves in life are the ones that bring people together rather than defeat them. Some games, after all, are won not by checkmate, but by finding the courage to say yes to love when it appears in the most unexpected places, even if it comes disguised as a challenge from a CEO who thought she knew everything about winning, and a single father who taught her what it really means to play for keeps.